YouTube Valley community, Beach Boys fans, random people on the internet, my name is Giggens, and we are here today to talk about the backstory to their classic album from 1966, Pet Sounds. So as you saw from clicking on this video, this is just the backstory of Pet Sounds. The actual review will be out in a couple of days, or if you're watching this in the future, it's out now, probably over here somewhere. So click on that for the actual review, and that's just the songs. This is just the backstory. The two videos together would have been a super long video, so I split them up, and I'm so excited to chat about this because this is the exact reason why I started my channel, was because there was always reviews about Pet Sounds and nothing about the other albums, which is why I started doing what I do. So, without hesitation, let's chat about Pet Sounds. Pet Sounds by the Beach Boys is arguably one of the greatest albums ever created. It defies genre, it champions the awkwardness of growing up, the pains and joys of love, and it set a benchmark for how imaginative and explorative pop music in general could be. Almost 60 years after its release, which I can't believe this album is almost 60 years old, it continues to inspire, continues to awe, and continues to reach new creatives hungry to enrich our ears with music from the soul. Pet Sounds was an album unlike anything the guys had ever released before. Sure, they'd put out some pretty intricate and mature sounding pop with 1965's Today album, but everything there got quickly pushed under the rug from their label Capitol, who wanted a more traditional, lighthearted pop listening experience. Brian Wilson obliged and delivered their Summer Days and Summer Nights album only a few months later, a commercial success peaking at number 2 on the Billboard charts that summer. A relatively joyous album that still showcased his incredible skill and knack for combining instruments to create new sonic textures that sounded like nothing else on the radio, but with way more upbeat and cheery songs compared to the more melancholic side 2 of Today. In July of 1965, Brian Wilson began to record the backing track for a song that Al Jardine brought to him. Al tried for almost a year to get Brian to do this one, thinking the guys should do their own version of it. Originally a Bahamian folk song known as the John B. Sails, it had been covered many times, usually by folk groups, and went under the names I Want to Go Home, Wreck of the John B., and the one Brian settled on, Sloop John B. Brian had assembled his new favorite group of studio musicians who over the years would affectionately come to be known as the Wrecking Crew, and for the sake of this video I'm just going to call them the Wrecking Crew as well. They set to work only to drop the song altogether until December of 1965. In September of 65, Brian got the guys back together to record their Party album, which was kind of a stopgap release in between Summer Days and Summer Nights and what would become Pet Sounds. Capitol was like, we're going to put out a greatest hits, and Brian was like, no, please don't do that. Let's make something new and different, and we'll put that out instead. And it's interesting because bands these days are lucky if they put out one album every couple of years. In 1965 alone, the Beach Boys put out several albums in 1 year, an unheard of streak these days, but fairly common back then, but you would never expect a band to put out 3 albums in 1 year these days. By October of 1965, the Beach Boys began work on the single The Little Girl I Once Knew, which ended up being a standalone single. It wasn't on any albums. And it came out in November of 65, and it sadly stalled at number 20 because of the dead air spaces in between the verses up to the chorus. It's like 3 seconds of absolute silence, and for radio DJs, that's just dead air. People change stations, they think something happened, they lost connection, they're moving on. So the single stalled. Only a few weeks later, in December of 1965, Capitol pushed out Barbara Ann as a single, which none of the guys wanted as a single, especially Brian, but it became a humongous success in early 66, peaking at number 2. We can probably mark the most earnest beginnings of Pet Sounds in October of 1965, with Brian wanting to train himself on working with an orchestra. He booked time at United Recorders in LA and worked with a classical group on recordings of Stella by Starlight, How Deep is the Ocean, and 3 Blind Mice, all of which remain unreleased. These experiments furthered in November, working with the Honeys on a cover of Row Row, Row Your Boat, and a couple of comedy songs, one named Dick and one named Fuzz, which were basically just jokes. Sadly, these also remain unreleased. Back over at his beloved Western Recorder studio, he tracked Trombone Dixie and a new song called In My Childhood, which would later become known as You Still Believe in Me. A song that would start life as Run James Run would soon enough become the title track of the upcoming album, Pet Sounds. Recordings and focus for the new batch of songs changed entirely when Brian heard the Beatles' latest album, Rubber Soul, in December of 1965. From that point on, Brian was convinced he had to make the greatest album ever made, as he thought Rubber Soul was as good as pop music was ever going to get. Coincidentally, around this time, Brian's friend Lauren Schwartz introduced him to his friend who worked in advertising as a copywriter and a jingle writer for the Carson Roberts ad agency, a guy named Tony Asher. They instantly hit it off, and as Brian was always looking for new collaborators and new ideas, he asked Tony to write words for the new songs he had and the ones he was going to write. The guys talked about life, love, growing up, relationships, internal struggles, and more during some deep conversations, and thusly the seeds of Pet Sounds were sown. What we can call the official start date, if you will, for the Pet Sounds sessions was January 18th, 1966, and that will continue over the next 4 months. This start date finds Brian with the Wrecking Crew working out Let's Go Away for a while. For context, the Beach Boys were on tour in Japan at this time, and a lot of pictures got taken of them hanging out in Japan, and ended up being a lot of these pictures on the back of their record. Throughout January, Brian would bounce between Western Recorders and Gold Star for songs like Wouldn't It Be Nice, You Still Believe in Me, and Caroline No. In February, tracks like Hang On to Your Ego were recorded and vocals were painfully laid down. Mike was already showing signs of not digging the new stuff, but the guys were openly expressing to Brian how hard the songs were to sing. Brian kept the sessions flowing and getting the guys to sing everything perfectly, knowing full well they could do it. From here, Don't Talk, I Just Wasn't Made for These Times, That's Not Me, and even the beginnings of Good Vibrations took place in February, as well as the photo shoot for the pictures that would eventually become the now iconic cover photo. Good Vibrations took a back seat for now, and in March, work was started up on A Waiting for the Day, God Only Knows, Here Today, and March also saw the release of Brian's first solo single, Caroline No. On April 16th, 1966, Brian Wilson mastered the Pet Sounds album. Maybe named by Mike as these were Brian's favorite sounds and they had those zoo pictures, so why not? Or maybe named because it's rumored that Mike said, who would hear this, the ears of a dog? Just shy of a month later, on May 15th, 1966, Pet Sounds is delivered to the world. Brian is beyond ecstatic for its release, even though several meetings with Capitol went awful. Capitol didn't like it or see its appeal, and they wanted to shelve the entire project. They eventually saw how much it meant to Brian, who, by the way, helped bring in a ton of money to that record label, and decided to put it out. The record grew up the charts a little slower than normal, eventually peaking at number 10 on July 2nd, and didn't go gold for quite some time, a first for the Beach Boys. Needless to say, Brian was devastated by the initial reaction. He was hurt that it wasn't being promoted correctly, that the audiences weren't open to hearing and experiencing new sounds, and what sealed it all up was Capitol's decision to release Best of the Beach Boys Volume 1, which went on to peak at number 8 and quickly go gold. During this time, Brian went back to Good Vibrations, a song he would work on for the next few months, and it became a game-changing #1 smash hit single that definitely perked up Capitol's ears and saw what he was doing, but that's another story for another time. Pet Sounds is more than an album. It's the soundtrack to so many of our lives. It's music that is so deeply embedded in our DNA. It's the shared experience that growing up is hard, understanding the world is an ongoing series of ups and downs. Relationships can be difficult or beautiful. You can remain youthful as you age, and it's okay to recognize your feelings and how much you feel unheard or voiceless sometimes. This record was made by a guy who felt so much incredible music deep within himself, and he did everything he could with his studio musicians and the incredible voices of the Beach Boys to get it out of his system and into our ears. Every person that discovers this album begins their own personal journey with it. It's an album for your life. Brian's sounds become your sounds. The greatest album ever made, Pet Sounds by the Beach Boys. There you go. That's the backstory. Review video coming up next. Feel free to leave some comments below about your thoughts on the story of this album and what it means to you. And look forward to the review. Review number 500. It's a very special one. So thank you for watching, and thank you for being here, and thank you for cheering on Brian. This review is dedicated to the memory of Brian Wilson. Thanks for watching.